What? I'm not a... I replied, trailing off. I slowly backed away from her, touching the skin on my face. It might have just been my imagination, but it almost felt waxy, like the skin of the creature. What's happening to me? What's going on? Jace said it takes 12 hours to convert, didn't he? You'll be fine until then, she said, but her voice wasn't very convincing. Even less convincing was the hand that slowly made its way down to her hip, where it rested against the butt of her gun. I'll go get him and let him know. I nodded, pacing back and forth nervously. I didn't feel any different, as I would have expected someone suffering from a mind-altering virus to feel. The only thing was the paranoia that now set in. Would the creature still attack me? Or would they accept me as one of their own? The darkness was suffocating. It surrounded me, and it felt like I couldn't breathe. I was disoriented and panicking. What could I do? What was there to do? If I allowed myself to become one of those creatures, would I kill Scarlet? The seconds until she was back with Jace felt like hours, but she finally came back and explained the situation. Well, he's definitely not contagious, so you don't have to worry about being near him, at least for now. But there's not much else I can do to put a positive spin on this. We have no idea what a cure might look like, and even if we did, there'd be no way to make it unless we somehow had all the ingredients here in this building. God, how could I have forgotten about the eyes? When did I get it, I asked. How come Scarlet doesn't have it? Did you ever smell something really pungent? Something that smelled so bad it almost made you throw up? Jace returned my question with one of his own. Probably around the testing chamber, if you'd gone that far. Yeah, I said, recalling the smell. Right when we walked in. It faded after a bit, though. What happened? That was it. The virus has a distinct smell, and once you smell it, there's some time to escape, but if you adjust to the smell, then by that time it's already gotten inside you. But how come Scarlet didn't get it? Did all the virus go into me? Jace glanced at Scarlet without saying anything. Then he gasped. Wait, did you smell it? No way, she replied. Jace leapt up in the air with a shout, pumping his fist. Thank Jesus, there's hope. What? What is it? Scarlet asked. You're immune, he replied, grabbing her by the shoulders. When the scientists were testing it, they of course accounted for immunity. They said something about how the scent of the virus was impactful, that an early sign of immunity might be an inability to sense it. Him getting affected while you didn't. It seems highly likely that you have some kind of immunity. Really? That's incredible, she said. Can we use it to help Dexter? Jace let out a long exhale. There may be a way. It'll be hard, and if it were just for you, I wouldn't do it. So generous, Scarlet muttered. That sounds harsh, I know, but it involves us taking back the corporate office, and that means getting out. What's in the corporate office, I asked. The head scientist. She wasn't in with Rion, not completely, but Rion took her by force in the event that a scientist was needed. Her name is Julia Russell. She has access to the early tests of the cure. None of them were successful, but given the proper antibodies, I was told they could have worked. So the antibodies might be in my blood, Scarlet asked. Exactly, but we're working against the clock here. We've got 8, maybe 9 hours, and then it'll be too late. The cure won't work once Dex has already turned. Don't suppose you have a plan, do you? I asked, and for the first time a smile crept across my face. I was hoping you'd ask, Jace said. March 21st. The plan was relatively simple, in theory at least. Scarlet and I would crawl into the upper floors through the ceiling. Then I'd search for the scientist, and she'd activate the elevator, allowing reinforcements to follow in case something went amiss. Once we had the scientist, he'd aid us with the serum, and after adding Scarlet's blood, I'd be cured. Then we could make contact with the FBI, and hopefully make it out of this wretched place. We spent the last half hour or so going over the plan, as blueprints of all the floors and the ventilation systems were accessible from the office we had access to. Now, we're just getting ready to go. How does it feel? Scarlet asked as we set out from the office, beneath the floor tiles we'd eventually climb through. I don't know. It's almost normal, but sometimes I feel something inside of me. It might be me thinking about it too much, but it feels like it's rising up. And if I don't push it down, it'll take over. She nodded, not replying verbally. I had begun to relax about it. I knew I was on the verge of getting the cure, and not a lot could go wrong at this point. Chase had told us that Rion's pistol was the only weapon up there, and one man with a pistol would be no match for us. We'd been trained numerous times on specific scenarios, and knowing the exact floor plan certainly wouldn't hurt our chances. It was about 5 minutes before Jace came through again. He knocked on the door as he entered and said, "We're ready when you are. How are you holding up?" I knew the question was directed at me. Well, I haven't felt hungry for human flesh yet. Other than that, I'm perfectly fine. I saw the corner of his mouth turn up in the darkness. It's good to keep your humor. It helps retain your humanity. Well, you're good to go whenever. You know the way, after all. And with that, he returned to wait with the team he'd selected to aid us in our mission. He wasn't one to mince words. He said what needed to be said and nothing more. I'd only known him for a day, but even I could tell that. I pushed myself off the table I'd been leaning against and said, "We might as well get going. There's no time like the present." Scarlet was equally ready, at least externally. "Agreed," she replied, and we began the cumbersome process of entering the ventilation shaft above our heads. A ladder had been produced from the supply closet, but the hardest part wasn't getting in. It would be distributing our weight sufficiently so that we didn't collapse half the system simply by hanging for a minute too long. It took 2 of us 5 minutes to get up, but we did so without disaster, and then the doubly cumbersome process of slowly shuffling our way through the cramped metal space was underway. We'd memorized the directions to get there, but there was still the possibility of missing a turn or forgetting a drop just ahead, so we crawled in utter silence, focused entirely on the task at hand. I was brimming with confidence as we neared the final destination. The final trial we had to surmount before entering the upper floor was a difficult one. A 20-foot vertical shaft that we would have to climb using nothing but the force of our friction. I arrived at the wall earlier than I'd expected, my hands brushing against the black wall a few steps before I'd anticipated. "We're here," I hissed, back to Scarlet to avoid unwanted collisions. "All right," she whispered. "Don't fall on me. It would be a shame to have survived a zombie attack only to be killed by my clumsy partner." "Whatever," I said, rolling my eyes in the darkness as a smile spread across my face. I felt the air above my head to make sure I wasn't going to bump into anything, and stood. For a moment, I just stretched my legs, readjusting to standing, and then I prepared for the ascent. I considered for a moment sticking my flashlight in my mouth, just to provide some sense of security, but decided there was no need. Like the rest of the vents, I had the vertical shaft entirely memorized. I positioned my hands on either side of my body, pressing them against the walls of the shaft as I tested its give. When I was ready, I pushed off, lifting my feet off the ground and beginning to climb. It was a strenuous effort, inching my way up, minute by grueling minute. By the time I was halfway up, my arms and my legs, my torso, they all ached. But I didn't falter. I knew a lot rode on my shoulders, but I also knew I was more than up to the task. As I remained calm and collective, I shuffled my way up into the upper echelons of the building. 20 feet may not seem terribly high, but using the method of travel I was using, it took a considerable amount of time to traverse the distance, and the clacking sound of the ventilation system shifting around made it feel longer. But I did reach the top. When my hands finally felt the ledge, I let out a sigh of relief. Confident as I had been, there was always a chance that something could go horribly wrong, and I was glad that it hadn't. Then, of course, it did. A shriek like the one from the testing room emitted in the darkness, and a hand soon followed. It latched onto my hand, attempting to pry my grip from the ledge, and it nearly succeeded. However, I managed to grab on with my other hand at the last minute, saving myself and Scarlet from a very painful drop. "What is it?" Scarlet called as I grunted, struggling to pull myself up before the creature could impede my progress further. Unwilling to spare effort for response, I quickly lowered myself a small amount, then instantly pulled back up, using the excess momentum to knock the creature's legs out from under it. The gamble worked, and the thing slammed its head into the metal vent, stunning it momentarily. I used the temporary break to jump to my feet and call back down. "There's a creature up here! Hurry!" The vent was taller up here. I was able to stand, but just barely. It was still dark, but I could make out several forms further down the vent. "Come on, there's more of them!" I picked the stunned creature up off the ground and slammed its head into the wall before planting a foot on its back and sending it sprawling towards the others, then extending a hand to help Scarlet up. "What's going on? Why are they here?" "I don't know, but it can't be good. Let's deal with them first, then we'll think about it." She nodded, and we ran forward into the group. There were 5 of them, including the battered one I'd dealt with, and Scarlet immediately sent a spinning kick into one of them, sending it tumbling to the metal floor. I stepped on in and leapt forward, sending a punch at the throat of a second. I made contact and prepared to duck another return swing, but it never came. Instead, it turned to go after Scarlet. Without hesitation, I tackled it, slamming it into the wall, but it didn't seem to make an effort to retaliate, simply struggling against my hold and continuing after Scarlet. She was busy dumping two creatures over the edge. "They're not going after me," I called to her, the reason why slowly dawning on me. I bent down, picking up the creature, and hurled it over my head in the direction of the ledge. It landed hard on the floor, as I wasn't strong enough to clear the ledge, but its momentum carried it the rest of the way. "They must sense I have the virus in me. They're completely ignoring me." "Lucky you," Scarlet muttered, as the two remaining creatures advanced on her. "Give me a hand with these two, would you?" I jumped into action, launching a spinning back fist at the one that was nearest me. The blow glanced off its head with little damage, but it stumbled to the side, and I gave a mighty push as it was off balance, knocking it into the other one. The second one I was pushing over the ledge, but the first managed to barely keep its balance, teetering on the brink of the abyss. Scarlet finished the job, planting a kick heavily into its chest, and watched as it disappeared into the darkness. We quickly began to make our way to the vent we'd be making our entrance through. And as we walked, Scarlet asked, "Does that mean you're making the transition?" "I don't know. If not, I'm probably getting close. We'd better hurry." We ran the rest of the way, and when we made it to the vent, I quickly pried it open and lowered myself through. It struck me immediately as odd that the lights were out. It was dark as it had been in the lower levels. When Scarlet lowered herself down beside me, she noticed the same thing. "This isn't good. You don't think the creatures could have..." "How would the virus have gotten up here?" I asked, knowing the question she was going to ask. "Unless the scientists or someone in the lab area." The thought faded unfinished into the darkness. "Let's get this over with," Scarlet said. I began to wish I had some form of communication with her, or anyone to be honest, but it was impossible with the radio blockage. Before I could think twice about it, though, she was gone, and I was alone in the dark hallway. I touched the wall to get my bearings and set off for the main office where Jace believed the scientists were being held. I walked quietly, willing to accept the delay to avoid a large delay if someone or something heard me. Everything was empty. There was no sign of life anywhere, nor were there any signs of death we'd seen downstairs. It was just empty. I hurried through the halls, unwilling to test fate after our experience in the vents, and after some time, I arrived at the innermost office, that of Andrew Rione. The entrance was lavish, consisting of two massive wooden doors, a traditional entryway with a very modern security, and what I assumed to be a retinal scanner to the right of the door in evidence. The doors were at the end of a long hallway. Even through the darkness, though, I could tell that something was wrong. It was pretty easy to see that they were wide open. That wasn't a good sign. I guessed that there had been an outbreak, and as opposed to seeking out the creatures, the survivors had made their last stand in Rion's office. They evidently hadn't fared too terribly well. I cautiously approached the once luxurious office, and as I did so, the feeling of lurking evil within me rose, stronger than it had ever been. It knocked me to my knees, and I felt dizzy as I attempted to suppress it. I fought hard, making my way to my feet, as I knew there was quite a bit riding on me. As I examined the surroundings, fighting the feeling that my head was swimming, I realized that the office, perhaps, wasn't the best word to describe Rion's workspace. It seemed like a headquarters in of itself, as the room I was looking into was more like a lobby. I could see 4 hallways branching out from where I stood, which I had seen in the blueprints, but it was very different now that I was looking at them. All of this, just for one man. A mental picture of him was beginning to form, and it wasn't someone I thought I could get along with very well. Regardless, I followed Jace's instructions down the middle hallway. This also happened to be where the multiple blood trails seemed to be leading. I was about 10 steps down the hallway when I heard the first clunk. It came from somewhere ahead, and I froze, but nothing followed it. I knew I could do nothing but push on and hopefully be prepared for whatever arrived. There were several doors on either side of me, but I ignored them. Not only were they utterly empty, but my goal was in the deepest parts of the office. Jace had assumed, apparently correctly, that they would have tried to put as much space between themselves and the initial outbreak as possible, and that they would be tucked away in the deepest recesses of his office. When I finally did come across it, unlike the rest of the offices, it wasn't very luxurious. Just 2 plain doors. There were several corpses scattered about, but I knew I was running out of time, so I didn't waste any of it on them. I tried the handle, and it was unlocked, but when I pushed, the door wouldn't budge. I paused for a moment, considering my options, then I stepped back, ready to kick it down. However, before I could, one of the doors flung open, revealing a woman in a tattered white lab coat who was pointing a gun at me. "Who the hell are you, and why didn't they attack you?" she asked. "What? I'm an FBI agent. Before I could finish my explanation, a massive surge of darkness rose up, nearly blotting out my vision. I once again fell over, but this time I couldn't stand up. "You're infected, aren't you?" she said, brandishing the gun at me. "I don't have the cure. I wish I did, but the formula is incomplete. If I had the cure, do you think we'd still all be here right now?" "Don't shoot," I groaned. We have the missing piece. My partner, she's immune. Go inside. Get a dose ready. She'll be here any minute." The virus racked my body, and I began to convulse violently. Then, my rational brain lost control. I remember vague images from that time. The scientist slamming the door shut. I imagine she barricaded them after, then various flashes of hallway, and the other creatures as I wandered around the darkened floor. I didn't go too far from where I'd left, and the next thing I remember was Scarlet running down the hallway. The creature that I had become joined the crowd that followed her, and she fired several times at us, one of her bullets clipping me on the leg. Thankfully, it incapacitated me. Otherwise, I might have persisted, and something bad could have happened to one of us. The creature crawled for some time, but I eventually gave up. The next thing I remember was the lights turning on. The creature must have an aversion to light, because it felt incredibly painful. The creature cowered there on the carpet. Then with a jolt, I returned to consciousness. "Gah!" I shouted, sitting bolt upright as a sharp pain in my arm brought me back to reality. The events of the day quickly coming back to me. I looked down at my hands and saw that the gray was quickly fading. That's when I felt my cheeks, and the skin was warm and smooth. I looked around, Scarlet smiling, seeing the color returning to my eyes. "It's over. We made it." "Thank God. I was getting a little worried there for a minute," I groaned. "What the hell happened?" "They had shut down the power. I couldn't activate the elevator, so I decided to come back to you. But when I got here, it was just Dr. Russell. She explained what had happened with you, so she took some of my blood and got the cure ready. But then there was the matter of finding you, and in the dark, with who knows how many other creatures out there, it took a lot to find you. So we fought our way to the control room, turned the power back on, and while we were at it, we disabled the frequency jammer on the radios for backup. And from there, it was only a matter of time before we found you." As circulation returned to my body, I made my way to my feet with the help of Scarlet. "Alright, so what happened up there? Why were the creatures here, and how did they get in the vents?" "The virus is respiratory, something I tried to explain to Dr. Rion, but he refused to acknowledge it." Dr. Russell stepped in. "As soon as the first ventilation cycle started, it made its way from down there to up here. Several of them began to transform. I barricaded myself in the inner office with doses of the cure ready. I mean, I really didn't have much else to do other than wait, and that's what I did." "So where's Rion now?" Scarlet asked. "He's gonna have to answer for all this." "I don't know," Dr. Russell shrugged. "I haven't seen him since the outbreak up here began, so he most likely got infected and turned into one of those," she said, gesturing to the corpses either dead or cowering from the fluorescent lights. "I suppose that's fitting," I said with a shrug. "Destroyed by the very thing that you inadvertently created." "Guess so," Scarlet nodded. "So, how far out is backup?" I asked. I can't be the only one getting sick of walking on carpeted floors. "They should be getting here any minute. Advanced teams are getting flown in, and it sounds like Clay is with one of them." "Clay? What does she want?" I asked. "Don't let her hear you talking like that. She's still our superior. But my guess would be that we're both in line for a promotion." The thought was comforting, a sensation that felt almost unfamiliar after the past day, and the minutes until they arrived flew by. The helicopters landed on the roof, and agents in hazmat suits entered through the rooftop entrance. Once we explained that we'd been cured, and that the airborne form of the virus would most likely remain dormant for several more hours until the creatures up there reached maturity, Scarlet helped me up the ladder, and several medics attended to the bullet in my leg. It was such a flurry of activity, agents hurrying around and scientists yelling at them to be more careful, but I had been put on some minor painkillers as the medics fixed my leg, so I was oblivious to most of it. Once things started to settle down, Scarlet came over to sit by me. "They're going to burn it to the ground," she said. "They talked to Jace, since it seems like the company's going to him, and he thinks that it's the best thing to do. There's no board or anything. Rion owned the entirety of the company, so it's all up to him now." "That's good," I replied. "He deserves it. I'd only known him for that day, but if that was how he handled an outbreak of zombie virus, running a company should be light work for him. Well, that's mission number 1 in the books. I have to say that it's not my definition of routine. I might check out the benefits we got from that, she mused. Early retirement is a serious option for me. I laughed, but quickly regained my composure as a woman approached us. I recognized her immediately as Carmen Clay, and when I did my best attempt at snapping to attention, she held up a hand. At ease, Agent. You've done enough today. Thanks, ma'am, I replied. Well, if my ears are correct, I heard the words retirement getting tossed around here, she said, turning to Scarlet. I do hope a little mission like that won't be enough to scare off a fantastic pairing like you. I was just joking, ma'am, Scarlet replied. Although, I wouldn't say no to some time off. Of course, Clay nodded. In all seriousness, this was an incredibly strenuous, dangerous, and difficult mission. I could name a dozen veterans here who wouldn't be able to handle it, and I want you both to know how proud I am of your efforts. Thank you, Scarlet said. Also, I want to let you know what the scientists calculated. If you hadn't contacted us, there was an 87% chance that the virus would have made it out of the building, and from there, a 63% chance that it would have survived the first day. If it survived that first day, it would have become airborne, and in that scenario, there would be a 3% chance that we would be able to stop it. The world is in your debt, though they may never know it. My jaw dropped at the numbers. That's bad, ma'am. I'm glad we were able to do our job. So are we all. You two, you make an excellent team. You remind me a lot of myself and my former partner. I think you're going to have great careers with the Bureau. Thank you, said Scarlet. That means a lot, ma'am. Well, you'd best be leaving now, Clay told us. I'm giving both of you paid time off. Go somewhere nice. Enjoy yourselves. We assured her we would, and Scarlet helped me into the waiting helicopter. As we flew off towards the nearby base, the sun was just beginning to rise in the east. To those who have never experienced a sunrise from a helicopter, I must recommend it. It's beautiful. And with that, my first mission with the Supernatural Division of the FBI came to a close. It was my first, but it certainly would not be my last. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Well, that was the first part of our special division of the FBI. I'm sure there will be more stories to come. If you enjoyed this author's work, it is SuspiciousNail949, and you can find him on Reddit. I've linked his account, so go have a look at his other stuff. He has quite a portfolio. Let's go ahead and thank our patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle, Emily Coltsfoot, and Xaronana for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And thanks to Glen Jenkins for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do it without you. And welcome back, Glen. We're glad to see you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can be one of my Spooky Skeleton tier contributors and have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I do. You can also get your videos on a Tuesday and a Thursday, so come on down and have a look. I've got a link to my latest book in the description as well, Sleepless Nights, so if you'd like to have a look at this year's compilation, come on down to Amazon and get your own copy. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.